It's our December meeting of the think tank, and our journey today, we're welcoming everybody, which we've just been, we'll start off with, and then you can see how the journey will progress throughout the next hour and a half. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody here and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in all the places that we meet from today, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also want to take the opportunity of celebrating our Indigenous women leaders, and today I'd like to acknowledge Senator Dorinda Cox. Dorinda is the first Indigenous woman to represent WA in the Senate, and she was sworn in October. And doing some research on her profile, it was interesting to see that her priorities are around treaties with Indigenous Australians, having a national family violence strategy. She's really into the space of ending violence against women. And also she's spoken out on climate change already. So that's wonderful. I see that Alana, you're from the Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation, and Suzanne's from Wurundjeri Wurrung in Melbourne. Oh, Wurundjeri, I'm probably not saying it right. But anyway, that's fantastic to see where everyone is from. So, for those who haven't joined the think tank previously, I just want to reiterate that Zonta Says Now to Gender Equality and Climate Action is all about joining the dots. If you think of us as being a steam train, we have the greenhouse gas emissions that lead to global warming and the extreme weather events that trigger the social disruption. And from that social disruption, any existing inequalities are magnified. So we're at risk of losing the gains in gender equality that we've made over the last century. So we work at both ends of that train by ramping up all of Zonta's activities to close the gender gap and reduce emissions. And as Mary Crooks put it at our District 23 conference only a couple of months ago, if we don't stop the planet burning, we can forget about gender equity. So we have our framework that we work from. So we gather the facts, reduce our own emissions. Once we know what we're doing with our facts and reducing our own emissions, we share our story by adding our voice and joining conversations. We advocate and we collaborate. So that's the Zonta Says Now in a nutshell. So the theme for December has been around biodiversity. And this was triggered by a couple of events that were happening. We had the COP26 that was happening in Glasgow that had a day on nature for the first time. We've had the COP26, which is around the biological diversity COP, which was meeting in China. We're in the middle of that COP because they've got two meetings. And then there's one next year with COP15 with a desertification convention of parties that meets in Ivory Coast next year. And in the newsletter, we talked about women in environmental leadership, which is what's prompted our guest speaker today. It was very sad at COP26 that Australia did get an award of the wrong sort. It got the Colossal Fossil Award, not for the first time, sadly, for not signing a pledge to phase out fossil fuels, pushing back against language in the agreement text, hinting at responsibility to pay for climate change damages their fossil fuel consumption has caused, and ignoring the people's demand for financing loss and damage in poorer countries. So there's a lot of work for us to do, and things can only get better. So I'd like to hand over now to Suzanne Lees, who will introduce Alana Mountain properly.
Okay, so Alana Mountain is an activist and community campaigner with Wildlife of the Central Highlands in Victoria, which is called WOTCH for short. For 10 years, Alana has worked to protect the precious Victorian mountain ash forests from logging, and those of you from Victoria or who visited Victoria know how beautiful those forests are. Alana has a degree in environmental science and has previously worked with Melbourne Water as an education officer. Alana has a history of supporting environmental organisations concerned with biodiversity, such as the Wilderness Society, CREASE, Foundation for the Amazon Rainforest, and Yellingbo Nature Reserve, which for people outside Victoria is a reserve sort of in the Yarra Ranges and very important for bird life. Currently, Alana's volunteer work is as a surveyor and fundraising coordinator with Wildlife of the Central Highlands, WOTCH. Her work includes surveying for threatened species and creating reports to give DELP for those outside of Victoria. That's the State Department of Environment, Land, Water and Environment, so that special protection zones can be created for these animals. And I was just talking at a lunch to somebody who works with DELP, and he said that basically there is a difference between the DELP reports and what groups like WOTCH come out with. Alana will talk about her work as a surveyor, activist and tree climber. Also how she's encouraged other women to learn surveying and climb trees, activities that have been considered male dominated. Alana will talk about the successful campaigns to stop logging. WOTCH has saved thousands of hectares of forests, and again, those from Victoria will know that our state government has announced that logging will cease 2030, but we do get the impression that the loggers are just trying to get as much as they can out before 2030. So some of you might have been following. At the moment, there has been some articles, some news items on the logging industry at the moment, which Alana may be prepared to talk about. Also, you might, fellow Victorians, will see that there has been a state government report just released on biodiversity, which says, surprise, that a lot of our animals, plants, wildlife's in danger. And it also said that they thought the logging was okay and in line with their ideas of what should happen. So Alana has a big job trying to protect our Victorian mountain ash forests, a very important job. So I'd like to introduce Alana. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne, and thank you everyone for having me here today. I was just going to ask if it would be possible, just after I share with you guys a bit more about what I've been up to share my screen, because I do have a presentation that's to do with WOTCH, if that's possible.
You should be able to do it. Just go for it.
Okay. Yeah, so I've got the permission to do so.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's all
well,
yours.
Yeah, thanks so much for the introduction, Suzanne. You make me feel like I've done a lot when you put it all into a huge paragraph like that. But yeah, I've been, as you shared, I've been involved in the forest movement for about a decade now, and I'm 30 years old. So I came across my first clear fell logging when I was only 20 years old. And it really, it lit a fire in my belly and it stirred something within me. And from that moment on, my life has just been centered around forest activism and conservation work, because I really quickly came to understand what we were losing each time that an area of forest is so drastically altered through those processes of, you know, completely obliterating a patch of high conservation value forest, teeming with all kinds of different animals such as leadbeater's possum or greater glider, which I've actually got my little greater glider doll with me today. And you know, all these animals, they're threatened and they're meant to be protected. And we have two competing values here in Victoria when it comes to the native forests of our state, and that's the industry of logging versus, you know, ecotourism and biodiversity and all the different ecosystem services that those biomes provide us. So I don't believe that those two can coexist. We have to choose one or the other. And currently we know that these forests are the most carbon dense forests on the planet, and they're extremely important for fighting, you know, this global climate crisis that we all exist within. So for me, it's a no-brainer. You know, we need to protect our catchments for water. We need to protect it for these beautiful species that we have present. And we need it for our spirit and for protecting, you know, the totems of our First Nations people. It's really culturally significant, these forests. And yeah, it's just the absolute, you know, underpinning thing that drives me every single day. Okay, so yeah, I am really invested in this group, Wildlife of the Central Highlands, or WOTCH. I got involved with them about 3.5 years ago, and it's one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life, trekking through dense forest gullies for hours on end, smashing your knees into logs and stumbling into blackberry bushes. And yeah, it's just a very physical, laborious challenge. And it's also the most incredible feeling when you go through all of that, you know, pain and emotional challenges to finally capture one of these animals that you can see here on camera. Because that moment, you know that once that report has been submitted to the government, you've saved an area of forest. So on the top left of your screen, that is a leadbeater's possum. And that's actually the faunal emblem of Victoria, and was thought to be extinct for quite a long time, like over 100 years. And it's really quite difficult to capture these little guys on camera because they're so fast, and they know so quickly when what they've come in for in terms of the call is a human and not a leady. They'll just flit away. So it's actually quite incredible to capture them on film. And then we have the greater glider. So that's what my doll is here on the top right in the hollow. And they are the largest possum that we have. And they've got these big fluffy tails, and they're just absolutely gorgeous, incredible animals. And they're quite opposite to leadbeater possum. They just sit there and very easy to film and find. They don't move a lot. And then you have a sooty owl in the bottom left. Beautiful, beautiful owls. And the powerful owl on the right. So this is some beautiful mature aged mixed species forest up in the Rubicon. This is what our forest should look like. This is actually not super old. You can see there's a couple of older trees, but this area, the Rubicon, was actually logged historically starting in the 80s, more intensely. So we still have lots of young forest. And here you can see a coop. So this is the scars on our beautiful planet right now of deforestation. And you can see that they've left a few trees, and usually they leave those trees as a seed tree or a habitat tree. So the seed trees are for when they do a regeneration burn to bring back or regenerate the forest, which is just absolutely untrue. They, if you look at this report that we just released, the failure rate within a mountain ash forest is actually 50%. So what we have occurring is deforestation. They cannot claim that this is sustainable or that they are able to regenerate our beautiful native forests. And you can see that those trees are actually quite black. So they typically die in the regeneration burns anyway, because of the intensity of them. Some of the fires reach over to 1,000 degrees Celsius, so very, very, very hot fires, which burn right down through to the D horizon of the soil profile, which eradicates all microbial diversity, mycelium, evaporates thousands of litres of water, so just totally drying up our catchments. I like to use the analogy of logging. I mean, the idea of going out to your vegetable garden, and you've got this amazing thriving vegetable garden, and you take a look at it and you go, oh, I could make this better. And then you go and get the whippersnipper and you whippersnipper up your whole beautiful garden, and then you decide that you're going to grow it all back by dumping a whole bunch of petrol on top and setting it on fire, and then you come back about 4 weeks later and you throw some seeds on it and expect it to grow back. That is kind of what they're doing. They're going in and they are creating mass disturbance, and then they're burning it really hot and destroying absolutely everything, and then just throwing a lot of seed. And what we have typically growing back are forests that are just really thick, dense areas of wattle, predominantly wattle, or just a single species, or sometimes lots and lots of eucalypts, but they all compete, for water and nutrients or whatever's in the soil. So what they're really creating is super dangerous, fire-prone regen. So this is why WOTCH exists. We wanted to use the prescriptions that are out there to protect threatened species by surveying. And most of us, we've got environmental science backgrounds, so we are quite accustomed to using things like thermal cameras. So because the leadbeater possum moves so quickly, and obviously, these are all nocturnal animals that we're looking for, the possums and the owls, we need to use some tech. So the thermal camera is quite amazing. You're just looking through the bush and up comes a tiny little thermal, mass that's red, and you can press a little button that points a laser so we can see where it is in the canopy, and then the other person will record it. So we do thermal camera surveys, we do spotlighting surveys. So we just shine up the spotlight into the canopy, and we also play the sounds of animal calls. So sometimes we just make them with our mouths, or we will play on a speaker. Other survey methods involve motion sensor camera traps. So these are usually day activities. Sometimes we might go out and survey all night, and then we'll go to sleep, and then in the morning someone will submit the report to the department, and then we'll all go out and start setting up cameras during the day. So you can see on the top right there, that's one of the motion sensor cameras. And we have to really be careful with the type of vegetation that we are placing the cameras out in. We need to think like a leadbeater's possum. So leadbeaters require connectivity in our forests. They don't like fragmentation. They need to move through the forest at night. And they also require wattle, silver wattle, because that's their main feed tree. So we look for areas where there's lots of wattle and there's good connectivity, but it's not too dense. And we want to put it, up over our heads, because the possums don't want to come down close to the ground in case there's feral animals or other predators. So that's kind of the process there. And we film the location and we take a GPS point, and then that's our evidence that that animal was found there. And we'll leave them out for about 6 weeks, and then we go back and collect them. But we have to also make sure that we're putting out these cameras in a timely fashion. So when those coops come up on the TRP, the timber release plan, we quickly make plans to go out and go, okay, well, we've only got this many weeks until they are going to log. So we need to have that camera out by this weekend, and we need to collect it then. So we're very, very diligent with our timeframes for capturing these animals. The other things that we look for are threatened flora, such as tree G-bungs. So currently there's a huge court case being run by Warburton Environment to do with tree G-bungs. So we can go out and look for these threatened species of tree and save right now big buffers around them, 50 metres, which has been really great. We've been kicking out the machines quite frequently, actually, by finding the G-bungs. And also large hollow-bearing tree surveys. But sometimes we're not always successful with that. The best thing that we can do is capture a leadbeater possum, because that's a huge 200-metre buffer that we get. This is the kind of stuff that we're looking at in our playbacks. It's not the best photo from the video, but you can just see the possum up over here with the little eye. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor. I think that's a video. Oh, come on. Sorry, my laptop is thinking.
How do you see anything on that? That's amazing. I'm very aware of time, Alana, so point it out again, and there you go. now.
I'm just going to have to keep going with it. Sorry, because my laptop just froze. But yeah, how many more minutes do I have left? Sorry.
Only got about 5.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll wrap it up in a sec. So this is a map of the special protection zones, those red markings, and then all the black outline of the coops. So you can see that, you know, the leadbeater is a little diamond shaped thing, and then that's the leadbeater exclusion zone that's placed around it. So if we get those big buffers, it knocks out massive areas of coop, and half the time makes it super unviable for them to log because they can't actually enter the coop quite easily. There's a greater glider, big fluffy guy.
Oh, gorgeous.
Yeah, so they're really easy to spot because they've got these huge, big yellow eyes. You just instantly know that's a greater glider. This is how we film them.
Okay, coming down.
So that's what our survey evidence looks like. Here's just the greater glider prescription for timber harvesting. So if we find 5 or more greater gliders in a 1 kilometre transect, we can retain 40% of the basal area, which is the basal's the bottom of the trees. So if you see a hollow at the bottom of a tree, that's a basal hollow. But the rest of the coop can be clear felled. And usually the vegetation that is retained, you know, dies and burns, or it's super fragmented. So yeah, we know that forests are like a family. Everything is intertwined and everything needs to be living in symbiosis and happy with each other. And we can't just fragment our forests and expect that trees are going to live and that the possums are going to be happy. That's just not how nature works. There's another disgusting picture of clearfell. There's some charred habitat islands that they leave behind, which we know is just not adequate at all. And just a little bit about our court cases. So I'll just finish up by sharing that currently we've been running this huge court case against Vic Forest for the last 2 years, and it regards bushfire affected threatened species. So post 2019-2020 bushfires, we mounted this court case, and we basically said that they had not, the department had not adequately explained how they were reproportioning the allocated areas for threatened species protection. So they're meant to have, you know, a certain amount of forest that is there for threatened species, but a large percentage of that was lost in the fires, as you guys know. So we've been going in and finding where these animals are and just like injuncting coop after coop. Currently we have 27 injuncted. So that's been a big thorn in the side of Vic Forest, alongside the other 9 court cases that are currently active, run by various environment groups. So that's actually, we've got 1 more now. But yeah, any little questions before I finish? That's my presentation, and thanks for listening.
I'm fascinated. It's really good. When you were talking in your preamble, you had talked about them being the most carbon dense forests on the planet. How do you measure that?
Well, if you check out David Lindenmayer, who is the most highly regarded forest scientist of Australia, he has lots of papers and amazing books. I think I've got one here.
Love it. I think this book will appear on the list. Yeah.
Here we go. This book. It's called
okay.
Fire Logging and the Future of Victoria's Giant Forests. So, yeah, he's done these incredible studies by, you know, digging up soil and having a look at how much carbon sequestered. But yeah, it's peer-reviewed science.
No, that's good. Excellent. So
yeah,
it's the trees and the soil together.
Yeah. I mean, Mountain ash are the tallest flowering plant in the world, and they can grow well beyond 80 meters. They're huge. Wow. Just like, you know, those huge lush forests in Tasmania. They're ancient Gondwanan forests, and they're just so efficient at what they do. They're like a big sponge.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Christine, and then Suzanne.
Thanks, Alana. That was a wonderful presentation. But with the injunctions you seek from Victorian Supreme Court, I assume you're obviously successful in getting the injunction. Are they fought by Vic Forest? Do they argue against the injunction? And are they ever successful?
Yeah, they absolutely argue against the injunctions. Vic Forest is scraping at the bottom of an empty barrel when it comes to timber, especially, you know, with the bushfires. We've had a huge loss to the resource. And yeah, they have to fight, because we lock up these areas of forest that for them are like, you know, they're next on the list of harvesting. But there was a high court battle with Friends of Letterby's possum, and I'm happy to, like, I can put always links to these kinds of things, because I know we're out of time, that explain where they're at with those court cases. But yeah, they actually, Friends of Leadbeater's possum lost on one term. I'm not sure what the actual like proper court terminology is, but they won on all of the other accounts, and the court actually awarded the costs to Friends of Leadbeater's possum and said that Vic Forest needed to pay, and was, you know, the transcript, the judge was like, we are actually just so amazed by the evidence and the strength of the case that Friends of Leadbeater's possums put forward. But yeah, we've been having some really big wins in the courts, like Kinglake Friends of the Forest just injuncted with East Gippsland Environment Centre, over 20 coops a few weeks ago for greater gliders. So there's over 150 coops now injuncted by court cases across the state, which is just amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Sue, you had something you're going to ask?
Yeah, so Alana, well, one observation, you might want to stay online after your presentation for a little while, because Christine is an environmental lawyer and she'll be speaking, and it might be interesting for you to do that. But also, how can we support your work? Like, what's it useful for us to do now? Write letters, or what do you recommend in terms of us supporting your causes?
Well, there's so many different ways that you can support. Firstly, you know, if you are interested in things like getting involved with rallies or direct action, you can send me a message about that. And, you know, there's lots of people from all walks of life who are stepping up into those roles. But if that's not your flavor, then there's things like helping to fundraise for the court cases, which obviously require lots of money for the lawyers and the expert witnesses, and to pay surveys to go out and get this evidence. Or there's things like, lobbying your local MPs. So we just created a little form submission through Environment Victoria, where you can enter your postcode, and we will send an email on your behalf to your local MP saying that you want, native forest logging to end, as per the after the logging report has revealed the extent of failed regeneration. But yeah, I can put that all in an email and give you guys
great.
actions.
Thank you.
You had your hand up.
Sorry, thanks. I didn't hear you say, Vicky. Alana, I noticed that there's a big push at the moment. It was yesterday I heard they're running out of pallets worldwide for providing supplies, vegetables or toilet rolls. You use all the right sorts of product to get people excited, but they're using Victorian native forests for the pallets, for making pallets. It just seems criminal to me, isn't it? It's just these beautiful forests end up as pallets for product that's being trucked here, there and everywhere. and I don't know the situations, but we've got a lot of plantation forests that came out of the madness of our logging industry a few years ago. And I don't know, but it seems to make good sense to me that why can't you use plantation forest and not native forest just to be able to produce a whole lot of pallets? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we've got the same thing here. We've got over 293,000 hectares of plantation forest. And we know that we don't need native forests to be turned into this single use resource such as pallets. It's absolutely criminal. Mountain ash and hardwood, it should be valued, and it was once valued, and loggers used to go in and they'd selectively log. And when you go into an area of forest that was selectively logged historically, it's completely different. They treaded so much more lightly, and they had so much more respect for the forest and the hardwood. And now it's just this intense industrialized go in and grab and, get out. And it's just, it's absolutely criminal to make such beautiful trees into pulp or pallets.
Wow.
Terrible.
Well,
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you, Alana. You really opened our eyes, and I'm absolutely amazed at the way that you photograph those possums. I just can't believe how you actually find them to a start. And your passion really shows through, and the work you're doing is absolutely amazing to protect the environment. So thank you so much for joining us today. As Sue pointed out, you're more than welcome to stay on and listen in a bit more, but a round of applause to Alana. Thank you so much. That was great. And so what I'm going to do is I'll just quickly go into screen share to get us on track, so as we know where we are. So thank you to Alana. And then the next thing that we are going to do is we're going to ask Leanne to introduce Christine. And Christine is from an environmental lawyer, but we'll hear more about that from Leanne. Over to you, Leanne.
Thank you, Carol. And firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the beautiful lands and seas of the Ramangeri people of the Ngarrindjeri Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, but also to say that they're the people we should listen to about the way that they cared for and looked after the environment so very well over very many generations. So it's my absolute pleasure today to introduce Christine Trenorden. She's from my club, the Zonta Club of the Fleurieu Peninsula, and I think we're indeed fortunate and benefit from Christine's vast experience in environmental resources, in development and in planning. So throughout her career as an environmental and planning lawyer, she's also been a judge in the District Court and a specialist and in the Court of Environment, Resources and Development. Christine's been concerned with ensuring that legal frameworks and policies around land use, planning and environmental protection from both pollution and biodiversity conservation, and it's appropriate and also has done a lot of work around ensuring that lawyers, judges and enforcement officers understand their roles and have relevant knowledge and skills around that area as well. But beyond this, Christine is really passionate about human rights and environmental justice and the importance of a safe and healthy environment for everyone. And this can be seen in her work in areas of native title, in anti-discrimination. She's also worked in Indonesia and elsewhere to support and improve the concepts of environmental law. And she's been mentoring environmental lawyers in the Pacific Islander nations and supporting and strengthening coastal and marine resource management. Amongst her many achievements, Christine has held positions on committees and boards. She's had teaching positions at universities and volunteered for her community. Christine is currently a board member of the Environmental Protection Authority South Australia and an independent chair of the Alexandrina Council's Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. So please join me in welcoming Christine Trenorden.
Thank you, Leanne, for that rather fulsome introduction. Today I was asked by Carol just to talk a little bit about my climate journey, in particular in relation to, well, with a particular focus on biodiversity. I have prepared a presentation which is mostly pictures, but it's for something to look at other than my face while I'm talking. So I'll now go to share my screen. Sorry, I haven't done this for a long while, so bear with me. Now. Oh, sorry, I think I did something wrong there. Let's start again.
Just the big green share screen should do it.
Yeah. No, I'm doing something wrong.
Don't worry, at the bottom of your screen, have you got the...
yeah, I've got that, but it's just bringing up the PowerPoint.
Okay, so... yeah.
No.
There we go.
Oh, good.
You're there.
Relief. Sorry about that. So I first, when I was growing up, I suppose I was introduced to the nature of our environment on biennial trips to Sydney to visit Mum's parents. So we'd drive across and I got to understand the different environments in our country. But I first really became aware of the natural environment, in particular the flora around me, when we lived in the Adelaide Hills when I was a teenager. I was a bookworm, so I didn't actually go outside much, but I did. When I did, I loved to go into the bush block of the property, and I was fascinated by the native orchids, terrestrial orchids of the Mount Lofty Ranges. So I thought you might enjoy some of those photos with me. My approach to the protection of biodiversity of flora and fauna has been informed by the experience in living in different climates, different natural environments, including the lush tropical environments of Papua New Guinea and Fiji, as well as the drier temperate climates of South Australia and Western Australia. And I also, as you heard from Leanna, worked in various places in the Pacific Island nations and in Indonesia and Laos over time. So I've experienced, in the sense of spending some time there, I've experienced a variety of environments. On reflection, once I became a lawyer, I think I was always keen to use my knowledge to make a difference with appropriate laws and policies to help protect the natural environment and courts to enforce them. Well, how could we do that? One way was to advocate for the appropriate laws. A second was to educate the community and clients and other lawyers to help change attitudes towards the natural environment. And a third way was to widen access to the courts to stop acts and activities, just like Alana's group has been doing, that threatened the destruction of or destroyed the natural environment. During my work as a barrister and solicitor, I was involved in a wide variety of matters concerning the environmental impacts of development proposals, the legality of the clearance of native vegetation, and whether development should be permitted in what were then called national parks. It seemed important to me to research and advocate for legislative change in all aspects of the protection of the natural environment. And a number of us did that through multidisciplinary associations such as the South Australian Environmental Law Association and then the National Environmental Law Association. I say multidisciplinary because they weren't just lawyers, there were also planners and scientists from a variety of backgrounds, particularly in relation to native flora and fauna, botany and so on. This was a time of cultural change, and I'm talking early 1980s. In that period, it was still the case in South Australia at least that the conditions of a Crown lease for pastoral activities, for example, required the clearance of a certain percentage of native vegetation every year. Can you believe? The concepts of vegetation or habitat corridors for wildlife, heritage agreements over the parcels of private land, and the establishment of offsets, just for some examples, were only just beginning to be recognised as a means to protect native flora and fauna species in that period. Indeed, the realisation that Australia was losing species at an alarming rate was only just happening. In this period, the mid-1980s in South Australia, just to give you an example, South Australia did not have the sort of forests that Alana's been talking about. South Australia only had 10% of its original native vegetation. So much had been cleared. Anyway, what to do? With others, I was active in advocating for a specialist environment court comprising both judges and experts in particular relevant fields, so an interdisciplinary court with jurisdiction to hear appeals in relation to development decisions, to issue stop work orders where activity was detrimental to the environment, or that kind of activity was being threatened. And that's a really important distinction, as well as charges of offending against the legislation we did have for protecting the environment. I should say this was also an interesting time because we, at a global level, we had the Brundtland report delivered by the World Commission on Environment and Development. Of course, the Brundtland report is what we all know as the book, Our Common Future. And I've put on the slide there one of the principles, number 3, from that report in relation to the conservation of biodiversity. It was an exciting period as we moved from the 80s into the 90s. In 1992, we had the benefit of the first United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, also known as the Earth Summit. I've put a photo of the leaders, world leaders, present at that conference in Rio de Janeiro, 1992. I strained to find the women leaders in that photo. I counted 2. Good luck if you can find any more than 2. At least things are a little bit better today. That conference produced the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the United Nations Forest Instrument, as well as Agenda 21, the agenda for the world for the 21st century in relation to environment and development. In Australia, what was happening? well in the intergovernmental agreement on the environment was entered into between the Commonwealth, all states and territories, Western Australia last, I have to say, and the Australian Local Government Association. Now that was a signal event, and also by the end of, so we have Rio de Janeiro in July 1992, and in December 1992, we had the National Strategy for Ecologically Sustainable Development produced. So exciting times for lawyers who are passionate about protecting the environment. And we were all doing a lot of work, holding a lot of conferences, having a lot of meetings nationally to encourage governments, both at Commonwealth and state level, to adopt laws and to also embrace the concept of specialist courts for environmental matters. South Australia decided to establish the specialist multidisciplinary Environment, Resources and Development Court in 1993, and I was appointed as one of the first judges of that court and later became the senior judge in the court. At the outset of the court, which comprised both judges and commissioners who were, some of them were planning commissioners, some of them had expertise in conservation matters, some were engineers. We had a variety of experts we could call on as commissioners. When the court was established, we had jurisdiction to hear matters under the Development Act, the Native Vegetation Act, the Water Resources Act, the Soil Conservation Act and the Waste Management Act, and later, when it was enacted, the Environment Protection Act, and also in due course in 1996, I think we got jurisdiction to hear native title matters as well. In my time as a judge, I both heard and determined and mediated matters, including in relation to aspects of biodiversity. Some of those that I recall involve the likely impact on marine species, habitats, and the coastal environment of aquaculture developments, tuna farms, oyster leases, and so on. Whether remnant native vegetation, including stands of threatened species of eucalypts, should be cleared for land division for residential development. The impacts on native vegetation and bird life of the development of vineyards, the impacts on the natural ecosystems and native fish of dam construction, and whether the unlawful construction of a very large dam on Kangaroo Island should be reversed and the native vegetation reinstated. They were some of the matters that we heard. We also had I also heard criminal proceedings in matters that involve pollution where fish had been killed and other species of flora and fauna. I was fortunate to learn so much on the court, listening to expert witnesses and sitting with specialists from the various fields of natural resources and other areas, and also having the opportunity to learn from my Aboriginal colleagues in native title what being one with the land actually meant. So it was a time of learning for me, as well as a time of other things. And then I retired from the court. My world changed when I went as an Australian international volunteer to Fiji. I developed some wonderful new insights into the biodiversity of flora and fauna species in the tropical world. I was a volunteer with the Oceania Regional Office of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. IUCN in case you don't know it, is an international NGO. It's recognised globally as an international organisation recognised by the UN, as well as the countries of the world. Its mission is a just world that values and conserves nature. I went there in late 2010 and stayed until early 2013. While I was there, I worked not just in Fiji, but in a number of Pacific Island nations. I do recall the excitement for me of attending the Pacific Islands roundtables for nature conservation in 2011, 2012 with NGOs, environmental NGOs, conservation NGOs from across the Pacific, and also attending the inaugural Pacific Islands Species Forum in Honiara, Solomon Islands, in 2012, where I was thrilled to hear from scientists of their knowledge of new discoveries, new knowledge of known species, and of efforts at using traditional knowledge to protect biological diversity. I was also awed by the amount that we still don't know about species and the appalling rate of destruction of species all over the world in the Pacific, as well as Australia. Australia's very bad, but it's bad everywhere. In my time with IUCN, I had input into a range of measures. I should say, when I went as a volunteer, I was sort of given to understand, not specifically by anyone in particular, but that it would be, you know, a bit of an easy year. But it wasn't. I worked very hard. I worked long hours. I had a lot to do. Anyway, I had a great time. I had input into a lot of measures and projects directed at protecting species, at better managing the natural environment and addressing climate change. Some of these were enforcement within the system of locally managed marine areas, training enforcement officers, raising awareness and understanding of environmental impact assessment, improving the resilience of coastal and marine ecosystems to climate change through law, protecting mangrove ecosystems to increase the resilience to climate change and protect fish species. Mangroves are also wonderful sequesters of carbon. Establishing integrated river catchment management in the Nandi River basin in Fiji, working on a protected area management agreement with Conservation International and the Fiji government for the Sovi River basin, and writing a report on carbon rights in the Fiji context as part of a RED+ scheme, which stands for reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation and fostering conservation, etc., in the forest, in respect of natural forests. So I wrote a background report on carbon rights as a prelude to setting up a RED+ project in Fiji as part of an approach to climate change across the Pacific area. So other countries were doing similar things. As well, I worked with other NGOs in the conservation, biodiversity conservation areas, such as the World Wildlife Fund, Conservation International, and the National Trust of Fiji. I had access also to international experts in IUCN headquarters in Switzerland and elsewhere, in particular IUCN people in Bangkok. So I had a lot of discussions about protected areas, species, and natural resources. These are just some of the things I came to understand in my time with IUCN. And by the way, I volunteered there 2010 to the end of 2011. And then I volunteered to go back as an officer with IUCN for another year until early 2013, working as the senior environmental law officer in Fiji, based in Fiji. So some of the things I came to understand that I hadn't really come across before: the significance of the IUCN Red List and how it's compiled. That looks at the whole hierarchy of threatened, endangered, vulnerable species. The categories of protected areas set out in the IUCN guidelines for protected areas legislation. The threat posed to biodiversity from invasive species. I hadn't really realised the role of invasive species. The necessity of a human rights approach and drawing on customary law and leadership for the protection of biodiversity. The value in establishing locally marine managed areas managed according to traditional principles. The issue of Indigenous intellectual property rights and access and benefit sharing. The importance of valuing ecosystem management and an understanding of the concept of payment for ecosystem services. And the threats to biodiversity, known and unknown, posed by seabed minerals exploration and mining, attractive though it is to the low income and resource poor Pacific Island nations. Then I returned to Australia since 2013 for a period of 5 years. I was with University College London campus in Adelaide. Well, I did get to London from time to time, educating younger people, UCL master's degree students in environmental and energy law and natural resources governance. I'm still doing lectures once a year in the natural resources governance course in relation to law, human rights, and working with Indigenous communities, particularly educating around free, prior and informed consent as part of the social licensing unit within the natural resources course. As the professor responsible for the operation of the Australian campus of UCL reminded me when I started there in 2013, we are all global citizens. Being a global citizen means understanding the challenges our world faces and contributing to the solutions. Our first responsibility is to live in harmony with the environment.
That's great. Thank you, Christine. That was a really, really good presentation. I think a round of applause from everybody there. That was such an interesting history. And I think we just scratched the surface today. And I'm sure that there will be little anecdotes and stories of different elements which you've actually seen happen over time. Because you've been at the basis of a lot of the environmental law when it sort of really took off. It must be quite difficult for you to have seen how far we've come now and how far we've yet to go to get the balance that we need.
Particularly when I hear from people like Alana, what's happening in the forests of Victoria, yes.
Were there any questions quickly? We only have a minute for questions. Were there any there? Suzanne?
Christine, have you come across any situations with Indigenous women and land rights? I'm just thinking that there's a situation in South Australia near Hawker where they wanted to put a nuclear waste dump, government wanted to put a nuclear waste dump, and everybody approved it, basically except the Indigenous women whose land it was on. Have you heard anything about that one? And anyway, they finally, I think, it's going to be moved to Kimber, which is probably not great for them either. But that seems to me a really big issue that a lot of people don't really know about now, is that Indigenous land rights, and actually the women's land is different from the men's land, and the men are often asked, you know, if they will agree to it being used for whatever. They say yes, and the government thinks they've got permission.
Mm. Yes, look, it's not, I haven't been involved in, nor do I know a lot about the situation in Hawke's you referred to, but I'll just mention one example of that. When I was in Fiji, there was a mine proposed for a big valley just up northeast of Suva in Fiji in the mountains. The mining company said it had consulted as part of its CIA with the landowners, but they hadn't. What they had consulted with were the men and not the women. And the women came to, I was very much involved with the Fiji Environmental Law Association, and the women came and talked to us and said, we haven't had a say, we have not had an opportunity. Yes, the landowner, you're quite right, across many places, PNG is one I can think of too, where it's in some areas it is the women, the land runs through the maternal line. It's not the appropriate terminology, but yeah, there's been a failure, you know, also in the Pacific, there's a bit of a big man culture, and there's a failure to consult women. So it's happening, it happens everywhere. It's unfortunate and it needs to be redressed, but yes, I am familiar with those situations.
Wow.
What we do about it, we just have to keep asking the questions. Have you talked to the women? How long we have to go on doing it, I don't know. We've been doing it for a long, long time, and still people fail to consult with the women.
I think that'll be our take-home message, you know, keep asking, have you talked to the women? I think that's a great point to move on from. Thank you, Christine, that was great. I'll move on with the meeting. I'm very aware that we've only got basically 10 minutes left, so I want to get a few more things. That's great. Just going to knock myself off there. I'm just going to share the screen and we'll get on track. So we have, thank you, Christine. We'll just move on to international news. I just wanted to share with you that we did the webinar on women and climate change in September for Zonta International, where we introduced Zonta Says Now to the wider world. Since then, the USA Zonta Caucus has asked us if they can use Zonta Says Now District 12, District 13 as URLs for their caucus districts in the USA. And so we put that through to Zonta International just to keep them in the loop, so as they were aware that that was happening, because the USA Zonta Caucus is 110% behind us. It's fantastic. And subsequent to that, we've been liaising with the women from the USA Caucus, and we put up a proposal to do workshops at the Zonta Convention in Hamburg next year. So we put up for doing online and face-to-face versions of a Zonta Says Now workshop. So we'll do it from the story of how we started in District 23 and then show how it's taking it to another level through the Zonta USA Caucus. We've just learned so much from them. So it's, I just want to share with you some of the things, just let you know that was happening. Sandra, did you want to say anything to the group while we're here? It's just so lovely to see that you've thrown your crutches away.
Yeah. Well, occasionally I need my walking stick, but I have thrown the crutches away. I also want to say thank you to Alana and Christine. That was very interesting today. And I'm from Victoria, Alana. I just happen to live in Perth at the moment. But yeah, I know those wonderful forests, and it just amazes me why people would have to cut that wood down when there's so much other wood that's sustainable around. But anyway, we can work on governments about that. I just wanted to say that it's the Zonta Club of Adelaide Flinders are having their 40th birthday party tomorrow, which I was supposed to be at, but due to surgery didn't quite get there. So I'm wishing them well, and I know everyone in the area too will. And I also want to make you aware that the Zonta Club of Gawler was one of 4 winners in the elevator pitch video section. So that was brilliant by Gawler. There are no elevators in Gawler, but they came up with a very good pitch. That was very, very good of them. So if you haven't seen it, go on our district website and you'll be able to see that. We put the news flash out on Thursday, so that should be in your inbox there somewhere. I just wanted to say to the think tankers that we're having our board meeting, well, the first time we might all get together this biennium, in Bendigo on the 18th of March, and then we'll go to the Area 1 and 4 workshop on the 19th and 20th up in Albury-Wodonga. And Carol's going to come to that so that she can catch up with all the people who are involved with the think tank, etc., in Victoria when we have that workshop. So she's looking forward to meeting you, Suzanne, and everybody else. So that'll be a good opportunity for her. The other things I want to say is that and I put it in the news flash, and also Carol's got it in your newsletter, that because we've got an election coming up next year, this is the perfect opportunity for clubs to start advocating and asking anyone who's standing and anyone and everyone who's standing where they stand on women's issues and where they stand on climate action and what are they proposing to do. Now, I know some people get a bit nervous and they think this is political. Well, it is political, but it's not partisan. You're not advocating on behalf of any party. You're asking people what they are going to represent, and if they want the women's vote, well, we want to know what they're going to represent us with. So please be strong with that in your clubs and get the Zonta name out there that you are questioning all candidates who are standing. So I think they'll be good. And Carol's got a little video that's going to pop up now from the US caucus about being political. So we'll go to that, Carol.
Yeah, I just want to just see if it works. Come on. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Well, I think it's that was a video from the Zonta USA caucus. That's one that they produced. So I thought you'd be interested to see that. The link will be in the notes from the thing today. And I like their last quote, if we're not at the table, we may be on the menu.
Agreed.
Whoops, I'll go to the next one. I found this on the Go to the Climate Council. They have some really good tools, and they have one little area there on how to write an effective letter to the editor. So have a look at that at your leisure. I also want to just to mention just on some club actions. In our local club, we've stopped doing we print out one leaflet. We've stopped doing it as the twofold. We're now doing it as just as one DL, and that's so as we can use it at events to guide people to the website. So as we limit the amount of printing we do. What news feeds are you on? Jane Adornetto put me onto the Women's Agenda, and I think many people are already on it. It's a daily news feed that has some fantastic links. And one of the links the other day was to this report that showed how violence against women is stopping us achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's really worth a look. It was Alwyn actually mentioned that in the newsletter, the news flash, which you'll see. Alwyn also is mentioned the NGO CSWs. Last year, this year, sorry, they had a conversation circle on feminist action for climate justice, which I was watching through yesterday. Had a really good resource on women's human rights teaching, learning and advocacy that's worth a look. And the 50th anniversary NGO CSW, that's the Commission for Status of Women, is next March. And the theme, it's us. It's achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls in the context of climate change, environmental and disaster risk reduction policies and programs. I mean, this is about keep asking, have you talked to the women? I think we're going to be high profile on that. We're coming up to Christmas. Choose to have a plastic-free Christmas. And thanks for Vicky for forwarding some tips, which I'll put onto the website. And also we had some tips from Bronwyn and the story of the zero waste family and a zero waste kit to keep in your bag with just a reusable coffee cup, water bottle, cloth bag, reusable cutlery, container and a handkerchief, some or all of those items. And it could save you using plastic, some simple ideas. And I want to thank those who were my guinea pigs last month for my online workshop for practicing how to use the En-ROAD simulator. That was Jane Sultana, Helen Jacquemard and Andrew Lees, Suzanne's husband. Since then I've done 4 more workshops, including to a Rotary Club, and I really got them stirred up so that I'm now going to a Probus Club to do a presentation of the simulator for them. So I'm now an official En-ROADS ambassador, one of 8 in Oceania. So thank you. WELA, I forgot what it stands for now, the Women's Environmental Leadership Australia have opened up their national leadership program for 20 people to join that for next year. So have a little look at that. And what's your present for the future going to be this Christmas? We can't finish off without having and remembering our endowment fund and how your gift that keeps on giving through the endowment fund. And then our next meeting won't be until February, which seems an awful long way away. And so I've penciled in the 19th of February, and remember to look at the notes because it will be there as well. So put it in your diary today. And then finally, it's nearly time to say farewell to 2021. And I want to thank everyone in the think tank for being curious and adventurous as we've started on our journey. And mostly of all, for standing up for the future of women and girls through your climate action. It's been wonderful, and we're on the beginning of our journey. What will 2022 bring on? You know, let's just look forward to it. And I wish you all the very best for the holiday season and the new year. So that formally, is there any other questions from anyone before I formally close the meeting? Yes, Val.
It's not a question, it's just to thank you for all the work that you've done. A superb beginning, and you've carried on with so much detail and expanded our horizons to such a degree that we owe you a real debt of gratitude. Thanks, Carol.
Well, I thank you all for stepping up. It's wonderful. I'm finding out so much about some wonderful people that we have in Zonta, and it's just been an absolute privilege to provide a platform to share it. So, you know, it's wonderful. So thank you all very much, and I'll look forward to catching up with you all again in February. And thanks again to Alana, and thanks again to Christine for sharing your fantastic stories. We'll look forward to more. Thank you.
Bye. See you
Thank
all.
you. See you later.
Bye.